Welcome to the European Forum Alpbach 2020, to our session Voices of Transformation. The general topic of the European Forum 2020 is called fundamentals. Actually, when we came up with this topic a year ago, it was discussed very controversially. Which fundamentals? Whose fundamentals? But I think the COVID-19 crisis has actually showcased dramatically how fragile some of our common ideals that we have, solidarity, democracy, trust in institutions, also in politics, are a little bit shaken. So the world after the pandemic is certainly not going to be the same as it has been before. We individually will change, society will change, governments will change. So a transformation will happen. The question we are discussing here today is, how are we gonna drive this transformation? Who will drive this transformation? And at which level maybe this transformation will happen? And so I'm really proud to have three profound experts, philosophers, intellectuals here with me in Alpbach in this hybrid settings where we have the luxury, actually, we will call it today, to be together, to talk to personally in a really nice environment. But it's going to be recorded so that many people can follow the thoughts and the visions we're going to create here and talk about and discuss about this grand transformation. Before we start, I would like to introduce to you our panelists. And I may start with Siegfried Walch. He's professor and head of the Department for the Non-Profit Social and Health Management at the MCI, that's the Management Center Innsbruck, the entrepreneurial school. He's board member of the Erasmus Mundus Joint Master, the European Master in Health Economics and Management. He worked as a consultant for leadership topics for public authorities and communities and regions, and studied marketing and corporate management at the University of Innsbruck, and actually received his PhD from the University in Berlin. Lisz Hirn. She studied humanities and singing in Graz, Paris, Vienna, and Kathmandu. She's a philosopher, publicist, artist, and lecturer. In her philosophical and scientific work, she focuses on philosophical anthropology, political philosophy, intercultural ethics, and philosophical practice. Lisz had appointments at Kathmandu University, Sophia University, Noku University, Tokyo, as well as the University in Lima. She taught in Tanger, Morocco, as well as in the University Vienna, and was a fellow at the Research Institute for Philosophy in Hanover, and actually a residence awardee at the famous Adishaki Laboratory for Arts Research in Tamil Nadu in India. Father Marte. He is rector of the Jesuits in Innsbruck and church principal in the Jesuit church. Father Marte studied business at the University in Innsbruck and worked for the Austrian Red Cross, also as Deputy General Secretary. In 1999, he entered the novitiate of the Jesuits, and he continued his studies, philosophy in Munich and theology in London and Innsbruck. 2008, he was ordained priest and headed the Kardinal König Center in Vienna. He is now with many duties, but also working as coach and with a focus on leadership. So it's a great pleasure to talk to you all, and I may ask you, maybe, now we have still the topic of fundamentals, and you personally, looking back at the last 6 months and the pandemic, do you share my thought that some of our fundamentals have been actually a little bit of shaken? Somebody wants to, Lisz, you smile. Do you want to start?
No, I was just thinking about the things that really shook me in the last month. And I think the first thing I thought was when this pandemic hit us was, I would have never guessed it's it would be a pandemic, like there could be a military conflict, there could be some climate crisis like coming up faster than it is now or something like that. But I would have never guessed that it would be a health crisis shaking us. And what I really kind of learned there was that the only thing that really held us together in this time, as I observed it, was that we have a strong welfare state, like we have health insurance, we have social security, and that this idea of individual good and collective good going together is actually something that helps us now with handling the crisis. So this became very, very clear to me. And also like the thought of that there's some responsibility also in philosophical practice, but also in religious practice to really engage in this kind of activism, to really strengthen these ideas of working together, of solidarity, and really also activating economic sources to found it better in the future. So we are better prepared maybe for another health crisis also in the future.
Well, Marte, you shook your head when you listened to...
No. I would like to share 3 emotional moments which I had. One was when I visited a dying person whom I had to bury afterwards during the pandemic. The second was being a prison chaplain to visit the prison during the pandemic, which is still until today a very difficult thing, to go into the prison with all the provisions we need to keep the virus out. But the most shaking thing was for me on 15th of March, when I had to address our congregations, and we have many people joining in the religious services, to tell them we have to stop service, because I did it at the end of the Eucharist, and during the Mass, all of a sudden, I realized for hundreds of years, since 1640 in this church, we said daily prayers, and now we have to stop. And the last time we stopped was in 1943, when the church was hit by a bomb. And so then I went to the pulpit, and all of a sudden I started to cry, and I couldn't stop. Because I was so taken by this thought, what a historical moment. Finally, then I overcame it, and I could tell people, and now we can celebrate again. But yeah, that's I think the emotional issues which come up in many families, in many workplaces, we shouldn't underestimate them.
But this mentioned solidarity. I mean, I personally also thought, at least in the first months, I could experience a lot of solidarity. It was between researchers in my area. It was even across institutions. How did you... I mean, you didn't have your community in the house, but could you still feel this joint spirit of we're going to make it together?
Yes, that was there, and we had many contacts, also internationally. But I have to say, many things decreased and many things grew. Growing was the importance of institutions. So we had much more expectations towards the regional government, they should tell us, or hospitals. So institutions became more important, I found, all of a sudden. More important, there was also more agitation, more breaking news, so everyone was alert. That was, and I found that the nation as nation became the main reference frame. It was not the European Union, it was the country where you lived in, all over the world. But there were also things decreasing. One thing was the issue of internationality. All of a sudden you didn't get visa, you couldn't travel, there were many restrictions. And the focus was us. So we here, so that I think is an issue. Personal autonomy was decreasing, just in order to protect others, but not respected by anyone. And long-term thinking was decreasing. All of a sudden, we were just thinking short-term. So no more planning for big conferences, no more planning for big traveling. But how do we get over the next 4 weeks? In my house, we have 70 people living there, and I'm responsible. One of the first things was secretly that I told the cooks, please get in enough food for 4 weeks, because usually we have just 2 weeks food. So that was very early to be prepared.
But this is an interesting point. Might I say something to that? Because it also struck me that there is another struggle going on. And the struggle, I think a lot of people didn't really realize how also conservative politics are. And I think like when you now mentioned cooking, so the issue of how to get your household in order, do homeschooling and so on, and the responsibilities for that, they were also exposed, like who is doing most of that job, who is maybe able to keep the job, who is going into unemployment, also concerning couple topics. So I think also the topic of gender equality and how to address these duties is a really, this is a topic I think we will have to take care of in the future, because the numbers are not a good sign for a good development in the future. So I think there's also a risk of a backlash here.
How did you experience the life during?
Well, the European Forum is 75 now. And I had a look into the constitution of the World Health Organization, which is 74 years old, only 1 year younger. And it includes twice the term fundamental. So health is a fundamental right for everybody, independent of their social status. So we have to ask ourselves, how well did we manage, or how well are we organizing this right for health at a global scale? Here in our environment, we suddenly were confronted with a similar challenge which most of the low and middle income countries face for a long time, the double burden of infectious and non-infectious diseases. So this was for me surprising, how this fundamental right that we discussed over the last decades permanently around the topic of non-communicable diseases, chronic diseases, suddenly affected us also in a similar way like low and middle income countries. In opposite to you, I experienced a very strong friendship of international colleagues. So it was not only, we were not only reduced to our own network, we of course, it also had a bounding moment for our teams in turning the whole institution from an on-campus into an online training exercise, or into an online campus. But at the same time, we also were very closely connected to our friends in our European masters, and also now in this new European university. So I remember at the beginning of March sitting in a Zoom conference with a colleague from Bologna, Norway and the Netherlands. And we were all somehow very empathic with the poor situation of the poor people in Bologna. And everybody 2 days later was in the same situation. But 2 days earlier, we all felt, okay, it will never affect us. It's only you poor people in Bologna. But 2 days later, we realized how quick it will develop. And then we connected with all the other colleagues all over Europe. And that was a very bounding moment to share all the experiences, how we reorganized our daily activities, how we reorganized safety for students, for staff members. So I think this was something which also strengthened our fundamental basis. Yeah.
You mentioned trust in institutions, and that was which was increased. Is that really thinking?
I said the importance and the expectations towards institutions, not necessarily the trust, but we expect very much to get good guidelines, correct guidelines. We complain if they are not correct. So you would never have so much communication from regional or local governments or national governments as now for the last 6 months. So we expect them. We expect that the police works correctly, that the hospitals function. So institutions all of a sudden get, they're important, and the people working there.
Do you think it increased the trust that we have as a society in those institutions, or is it too much of a dependence now? Or
I would say the expectation. An expectation has to do something with trust. I expect from a hospital that they run properly, that they have a 24-hour duty, and that finally worked. So.
Now, if I may add here, in the acute crisis situation, we observed that the trust was increasing. So and the more this whole situation developed, the more we realized that the epidemiological situation in Germany, Switzerland, Italy, Austria was not that different. The more we realized that this national crisis management won't help us in the long term. So at a certain point, we realized that there was a need to be involved. People wanted to be engaged in a kind of a risk management approach. And we're starting to complain about all these guidelines and rules, which 1 month earlier were highly appreciated.
Yes, but it's also a matter of time. It's the same like with solidarity. Of course, in the beginning, it's very easy to have this kind of notion, feeling, but the problem is the frustration if it takes longer, and nobody really knew how long it will take. And I had the feeling like that there was a radical decline in also the, how should I say, maybe the responsibility, or I don't know, the ambition to do so after Easter Sunday, Easter Monday, where suddenly it was clear it would take much longer. And there I think it's also important to see of which people we are talking about, because it's different in a university setting where of course you have your international context. It's not the same if you're coming from a social background where you don't have this access, or you might not get to see your, I don't know, your family for a long time. I have friends from Serbia, they're stuck here, so they're happy, they're students, they're teachers, but still they have no real numbers, they don't know how the situation is, and therefore, for example, I really feel that there's no real corresponding between countries also. So it's like this whole national bubble of health management and acting as if we could solve it on our own. Of course, we cannot do, but I feel like how it's transported also through media. When you look at the posters, it made me feel like we can solve it on our own, a little bubble with Austrians can do it like that. And I think we are really missing a lot of people here in Austria that maybe don't have the birth certificate, but work here, but live here, engage here, and are really kind of also left behind in a social ground or in a moral ground here.
I would say that's an important focus also which we still have to have. So how about the elderly in the home for the elderly? Mm-hmm. It was very difficult to visit them. Mm-hmm. How about the dying? How about the prisoners? How about the handicapped? Mm-hmm. So we have to exactly see where are these people who are disadvantaged. If you are rich and if you are well connected, if you are well educated, you have all access to medical care, to lawyers, to whatever. Yeah. But if not, then you are in trouble.
It's true.
I agree that these youth clubs, for example, those who take care of the children who can't stay at home, they were suddenly empty. And nobody knew where these kids are.
Yeah. Also the street workers, they told me stories about they have absolutely no idea what's going on. But they know there's a lot of trouble in families, like violence and so on. They know there are social issues, homelessness, and they were really worried. But what could you do? You did not know, can you go outside? Could you approach them or not? What is legal, what is illegal? So I think, there were... And I think there's still topics that will arise. What's with the youth? What's with the handicapped? What's with the elderly in your home? And also the question, because you mentioned it, and I found it very inspiring now to hear it, that this right to be healthy. For me, in the crisis, I thought, where's the right to have a good death? And yesterday I was discussing the topic of how a humane death could look like, how we could approach the topic. And this was something that really hit me hard to see or to imagine having someone in, for example, an elderly home, and I could not meet her or him there. So horrible, actually. And there was absolutely no solution how to handle this situation. So what is worth more? Like pure survival, or like a good life? And
I think these are points which we have to watch out for the next, say, 6 months, 12 months.
But the groups you mentioned, all the marginalized groups, prisoners and so on, I mean, this is, I think the pandemic made it more visible, no? But isn't it, these are topics we have to deal with also in the future after the pandemic? Or are we in a setting where we say all these issues are taken care of otherwise very well?
It is like a magnifying lens, if I may come in here. This whole crisis is helping us to see things much more clearly. We are currently working on a risk management project for the winter season with regards to COVID-19. And of course, we now know much more about the virus, and we know that we have to keep a distance and that loud singing in closed settings is not very clever to do. But now, turning this into a solution for winter tourism and involving every single hotel and restaurant owner is quite a challenge. And therefore I see here a learning experience for the society as a whole under this magnifying lens. So we will have a different tourism. We will have to think about palliative care in a different way. We will have to protect our elderly people's homes in a different way. And we don't have a lot of time. So our learning curves have to be extremely steep.
Yeah. I think that's a perfect transition. Use the crisis as a chance, I mean, I agree. I think we had some steep learnings, but it all, as I like the term magnifying. It magnified the problems we have. So if we now look forward and let's imagine we have the vaccination. But the next crisis is going to be there, be it the climate crisis, the next pandemic. So what's the chance? What's the learnings we can take, and where can we take the transformation to?
I think it's important that what we learn is sustainable. I think it shouldn't be a short term learning experience where we just manage to get through the crisis and then the other ones are there. But the vaccination is actually a good point. I wonder if we should think from the time where we have it, but I think we should think now how we're going to act with the vaccination. Because I think that whatever medical or technological improvement we have, it can be used in the wrong way. Economical reasons, whatever, national concurrences, international markets, blah. I think this is very, very difficult. But before we are not sure that we have this moral integrity to handle this vaccination in a good way, like, for example, to offer it to all countries or to make like a legal setting so it's like, distributed in a fair way. I think this will be maybe another crisis that it's coming, and not the climate crisis, but maybe the vaccination crisis. I don't know. But I think we should really start thinking now about how we're going to handle vaccination if it's on the market, hopefully soon when it's on the market.
President van der Bellen said there will be a solution sooner or later. It's either a vaccination or we will incorporate this virus in our daily routines and we will be able to learn to live with it. But there is all these other big issues which won't disappear. And I also liked Franz Fischler quoting in the opening the Kenyan, the researcher from Kenya who works on malaria protection, who says if all the effort that now goes into COVID-19 would go into malaria, that would be a big step forward. And I see the same thing in the debate that Bente Mikkelsen, the head of WHO's unit on non-communicable diseases, is currently highlighting, showing how much the chronic diseases have been neglected in the last half year. How many states had problems to provide proper treatment for heart diseases, for cancer, for respiratory diseases beside COVID-19. So all these challenges won't disappear. And the question is if we can learn, or if we can use this global effort to tackle COVID-19 to continue with all the other challenges in health.
Yeah, and I think the climate crisis will be one too. I mean, if we, it has a direct link to health. I mean, the COVID crisis is a result of climate crisis, and I think the difference is like the COVID pandemic, you could see it, feel it. It was so very present, and so there was this urge to do something. And like what you mentioned, malaria community, it's far away, it's not us, climate crisis, it's a little bit hotter. So they are not so tangible. And I think that's going to be really difficult, how to bundle resources, energy, money on other issues.
Which is so difficult to understand. We lose about 14 million people a year too early due to these non-communicable diseases, or these premature deaths, avoidable deaths, before you turn 69. If you turn that, or if you look into the Austrian numbers, we are not the most affected by non-communicable diseases in comparison to low and middle income countries. But even in Austria, it's 8,500 people a year that die too early. And then you can look into healthy life years and all these numbers, where you can see how much we could improve and change if you compare that now with the COVID-19 death rate, or if you compare that with the traffic incidents, the deadly. These are huge numbers, so I think they are visible. Why aren't we able to communicate this? Why aren't we able to get that on the political agenda?
This morning I met a civil engineer here, and he told me when you build a house, you have to build the foundations, the fundament. That fit perfectly to the subject topic of Alpbach this year. And he said you will see that for 6 months, but after 6 months the house is built, one story after another, and you will never see again the fundamentals. The foundations are invisible, except if there is a crack. Then if something becomes shaky, or you have a crack in the wall, then everyone starts thinking about the foundations. I found that a very good image, and here we are now.
We have cracks?
Yes. But there is a very good line from Leonard Cohen in his song Anthem. Leonard Cohen sings, "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." So that would be my approach, to look for the cracks and to see where the light gets, in. Yeah.
But I think that a real crack that always stays, and that also got very visible, is actual that we're mortals. This mortality topic is really something that we should approach. Yes. And I mean it now really in a philosophical, anthropological way, because we were talking about they died too early. Mm-hmm. But I really wonder if this discussion about dying too early is the thing we should approach, because it's also how we live in the time we have. And I really mean now we are very privileged in our countries here in Europe, here how we live, and this is not the way in other countries, apart from climate change and health conditions and so on. So the structures, democratic structures, whatever, aren't there. So we're talking about prolonging life, and I'm not completely sure why. So I have the feeling that we have this kind of topic that living as long as possible is the good life we have now. And that might be now, a little bit courageous, but I would say I think we should also see how we live the time we have. And I had this feeling that there's a lot of postponing, like we should postpone things at first, like when the pandemic started, postpone everything. And then people started like to act in a situation, to find solutions in the situations, because also this time is part of our life. And it's not about carpe diem and using every moment, but postponing everything to a better day and so on is kind of a very strange escapist mode of existing. So
I can agree with that, but I think there is some risk factors to which we expose young generations, like bad air pollution, tobacco smoke. Yeah? So there is no reason not to get rid of that and to improve the younger people's lives to have a longer life. I agree with you.
Healthier. I would agree with healthier or maybe more life quality.
Or more healthy life
and
years.
Also, don't get me wrong, I agree also that you should be warned about the risks, but you should be free to take risks, because I think this is what an autonomous being is about, a subject is about, to decide if I do something wrong or not. If you're not willing to do that anymore, then it has also consequences, because then the question is, am I more responsible at all? Because if I'm only in this framework, so
I really like to think that the leading cause of death are individual decisions. And the question is, where's the responsibility of the individual versus institutions or politics to manage this risk?
But that might be true if you live here. But that might not be true if you grow up in Jakarta, where you have a tobacco consumption rate among young males of 80%. You are just caught into it. There is no choice. I think that's true for us here and for most young people here, but it's not a global truth, I guess.
Yeah. So to give a choice, actually, would be the thing to do. To offer a choice.
Yeah, choice is one thing, but how do we balance individual choice, liberty, autonomy on one side, and responsibility for the common good? I mean, we all have to wear these masks now. Yeah? This was not our way of being 6 months ago, but we do it for the good of the other.
Yes, but also it reflects on you again, no? So if you do something good for the other, it also comes back. And not to speak now in a Christian way, it's actually not my topic or my way to see it, but I think there is a very true thought in that. It's actually very reasonable to do it and to approach the topic that this is something that actually comes back to me also. Or maybe somebody protects my family or my acquaintances or my friends and so on. So this topic of me being an island and I'm healthy, so or I'm rich, I can afford to live wherever I want. I do not need to take care of climate change, whatever, or climate crisis. I think it's a very short-sighted and very unreasonable approach, actually. Okay, I think you cannot find a proper argument why you should only look after your own good.
Yeah, but to a certain extent, that is mainstream.
Yes, this is true.
Yeah, I can do it for my own. I can buy it. I don't need the others. No, so.
Yeah, but you see, on the other hand, you see that we have a kind of a collective lesson learned via using these masks, and that's the majority. Yeah, you have the so-called COVID idiots, who don't comply, who go to the street to whatever, complain and protest for their right to not wear a mask. But for the majority, it is a collective learning that we are not an island, that we are not on our own, and that there is no way to not cooperate.
Yeah, but to get this insight into acting, I mean, making also like the approach to not only ask politicians to invest more in social security, in healthcare, also maybe death care. I would take it further. I think that should be something that we should really do in the future, maybe also in the close future. And I'm a little bit worried because a lot of people are talking now also from difficult political parties about saving money again. So this I find also a very problematic situation now to think about where can we save money after the pandemic. So I'm not sure that should be the approach because we have expenses to take care of, climate crisis and so on. So I think, saving might be a very problematic thing to think of now at the moment. We should invest more. We should try to invest in the right stuff.
You said like insight to get into acting. So, but who initiates this, acting moment? Is it? You mentioned the individual, you might be in the situation to drive it, but there's probably larger, I don't want to stress the institution again, but who will drive this acting, you think?
I would also say like NGOs, NPOs and so on, like we heard street workers, for example, and so on. To invest in them is a real investment also in social security in another way, like holding society together, but also giving young people a chance to maybe get some kind of care, health care, whatever, education and so on. So I wouldn't think only on top level projects. I would also not forget like acknowledging and giving support to small organizations who really work maybe locally and so on and really do a lot of good. And I think if people have a kind of a substance like a good life, Yeah, whatever. Let's not define it, but let's say I don't have to worry where I have to live, to eat, something to drink, and so on. So some basic things. I think it's easier to reason with people than if they're like in a state of emergency, where there's homelessness or other problems, or maybe sickness, addiction, and so on. So I think if we take care of this basic level, then we could, as institutions, as private, but also small organizations, reason maybe easier, or support change more, transformation more.
Yeah, I think one thing I would not like to lose is a long-term thinking. We are just in this short-term mode now, which we need to get over the next months. And every day I see how many infections we have and so on. But to get the long-term view and to keep that in a way and to plan for next year and for the next years. Otherwise, we will postpone all investments in companies. We will postpone big conferences, big meetings. I think that we would lose a lot. And the second thing is we should somehow try to get into a reflection mode. I mean, that is what we do now. I like the formula, event plus reflection is experience. And if you just hop from one event to another, that's like if you drink only espresso. Yeah? That's not, that can't be your standard drink. You need the time of reflection to step back. And there I would like to bring in a religious point. The seventh day, the Shabbat, which developed afterwards into Sunday, and for the Muslims into Friday, that is a cultural approach, and it's the biggest interruption which we have in society. In the Jewish tradition, they say more than the Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews. And I think we should see when do we have these times of reflection. If we just work 24/7 and have no interruption, no time also collectively, not just individually, but collectively, and that means for our area here probably Sunday, not to work, not to have shops open, and to calm down and to have a collective moment possible for families, for groups meeting, for culture, and also for religious services. So reflection, I think, to keep that. Otherwise, we will be just exhausted after the next 12 months.
Yes, I agree.
That was the event and reflection. The event itself, the handling the crisis, was a collective experience. And if we are now able to collectively reflect on this experience and to ask ourselves through this magnifying lens, how is our healthcare system set up? How are certain structures, institutions are set up collectively?
I would say it was a collective event.
It was, that's what I meant.
Through reflection, it becomes a collective experience.
Exactly. Yeah. And we started in March to exchange thoughts in a public health Google group all over Austria. I'm sure you are part of that. It's a Google group that was set up by the Medical University of Graz 2 years ago, and a few people took care of it and posted information. And suddenly this Google group grew within a week or two from 300 to 600 people, and was so lively, was exchanging all the knowledge, summarizing all the papers that were published on COVID-19. That was a collective experience and a collective learning experience and a crisis management experience, which turned from the event into a collective reflection, I would say. And now we have to continue with that. The only thing I fear is that we go back into our institutions, into our old roles, and all the people who dare to speak up in these Google groups and in all kind of public fora to manage the crisis and to reduce the impact of the virus need to continue speaking up in order to make sure that we now continue implementing some of the things we know for long. Improving primary care, improving social services, improving integration of social services and primary care, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but still I'm missing a little bit the interconnection from special collective groups to broader groups. And I remember now taking part in a project from Ludwig Boltzmann Institute. It was about psychological also consequences of the crisis and so on. What I found really interesting that there were a lot of participants from all different groups and backgrounds. And it really made sense what came out of it. So there were a lot of very interesting ideas, not as I imagine it to be, like maybe too high up ideas could not be, but they were very, very simple. Like what would help in a crisis on a daily basis? So what were problems of people who, for example, I found it a very good example I didn't think of, a mother living alone with her child. The child is ill. So chronically ill, so actually a risk group, part of the risk group. She cannot go out, she cannot leave the child alone because it's too small. Nobody can take care of. So what will she do? So there were a lot of groups taking care of the elderly, living alone at home. But she actually, nobody thought of her. And there were a lot of people like her. And in this project, this all came out and they made like proposals like to the experts, how to improve that. Or they also made clear what medical care they couldn't get during the crisis. And it's not all about chronic diseases. It's also about things concerning women, for example, contraception, but also the possibility to abortion and so on. These are all topics that are not very well addressed or were not addressed at all during the crisis, but still there were months where people were alone with these things. So now it's maybe not the highest intellectual topic, but I think this are topics that really change also society and how people think of democratic processes, of maybe medical care and so on. What is important to their life? Can I trust in institutions? Will they take care of me? Some yes, some really failed in doing that. So I agree with you, it's a magnifying glass, but I really think we should think and use all the experiences as broadly as possible and interconnect them. So it's not only intellectual collective groups, but really connect all the experiences together and make a good use of them. I mean, I hope so, but...
Yeah, and of course, there's always conflicting goals. There's a lot of contradicting views on these type of challenges. So if I look into the SDGs and SDG 3.4 on health, that's not all streamlined. Yeah? We really have to fight and to argue. And I think this was so well done during this crisis. All the scientists who spoke up, who went public, who fought with each other, who also allowed the public to participate in these fights. Suddenly the public realized, these scientists are not always on one page. It takes a while until they find a solution where the majority of them agrees with. Yeah. And I think this is the kind of culture which became visible for the public, which we should maintain and use for all these type of big questions we are still facing.
It's not only epidemiologists.
For sure,
we have to see it broader. Last week I could visit a big concert in Innsbruck in the theater, and you could feel that people were happy to hear together good music, and not to just sit at home at your Zoom screen. The music was perfect, but it was the collective experience what we had.
And the presence of other bodies, really, yes. It's also a topic, yes.
So I think culture is extremely important. We focus very much on health and on economy, but how about culture in the broadest sense? Small galleries. I'm responsible for a church. This church is completely useless. You can't rent it out. There is no income. But it's a space which is open where everybody can come in. There is no control, 365 days a year. And we need these spaces, museums, galleries, because there is so many places are now, you're not allowed to go in, you have to register. And I think we have to keep some spaces open for the public where they can meet without big
And also where an exchange is possible, because if I have to pay to come in, then
Yes,
of course
exactly.
there
Yes,
will
yes,
always
yes,
be
yes, yes.
people
Yes. Yeah.
excluded from it.
Yeah.
And I think it's very important to keep society together, to have this exchange at some points. I understand we don't want it all the time with
Permanently.
everyone
Yeah, exactly.
completely
Yes.
clear. But I think you need this kind of confrontation also, that there are other life realities. I'm afraid this is something we maybe also have to work on after the crisis, because now we are sure of keeping our gates safe and our little flats and apartments and our safe space. But I think we really have to consider opening spaces more. And there's some nice projects also in Vienna. They work, well, sometimes better, sometimes worse. But I like the approach of really opening also consumer-free spaces, because I see also a lot of youth that is not able to afford or to go to cinema or whatever. And they can, for example, exercise sports or see a concert and so on. And I find this a very great opportunity. Yeah. With a good program, not with a but a really good founded.
But now that you mentioned health, culture, economics, but I think the crisis really brought up how interconnected these topics really are.
Yeah.
And culture and health mental health is connected, and
social
economy
life
and
is
health,
social
life.
Yeah.
And I think maybe we should take this really also ahead, because it's so interdependent, and so that could be one learning.
Yeah, social life is social capital, and then social capital and cultural capital are social determinants of health. So at the end, it's all connected with each other. And
So we have the collective experience, and I fully agree. We need the space to do it, and then I think we also thought very interesting. I mean, who is at which level can you have this collective experience in a common space? Is it? It's the family, maybe as the smallest cell, and then it's friends and the communities. And which is the most efficient cell level or structural level where this can be brought forward, also in view of transformation? What do you think?
So it's a very difficult one. I'm not sure it's the family. Because I think that the level of also realizing other life realities, as I called it, is something that can really shake you, in a way of reflecting things differently, of feeling maybe exposed and so on. So I think it could be every other, to put it philosophically. Every other, maybe someone that I find really strange or acts really strange to me, or I don't know. I'm not sure that, when I realized how many families struggled also during the crisis with being together that closely, some of course with nice experiences, but it's also a matter of time. I'm not completely sure. I would say this cannot stand or be, I don't know. No, it cannot replace the experience being in public and being exposed, because family is doing something different. Friends are doing something different to me than when I'm in a common space that is, or public space that is for all people. Because then I cannot choose who is coming in, who should do as I want it or so. But because it's there's my freedom, there's the other freedom, and we have to handle this. I have to trust the other to wear the mask, for example, and so on. And I find it very interesting if you get into U-Bahn and then suddenly someone is taking the mask off and everyone is looking at this person. And also the vibe of a little bit responsibility, a little bit of guilt is, I wouldn't say works wonders, but it does something. So I think nothing can really replace that experience you have in common space. Yeah, I'm not sure.
I was observing my teenage boys at home. And of course they had a nice life in the family. We had lunch together, we had dinner together. So I felt this is perfect family life during this lockdown. But of course they were missing their peers a lot. And they were really suffering. So seeing them now meeting again with their friends and mingling with their friends and having the opportunity to be engaged in all kinds of groups is so important to them.
Yes.
They could replace it partly by playing Minecraft or other computer games. So they met their friends online. or they use their cell phone to play some board games at the table at 2 or 3 locations at the same times. Everybody filming each other and having some interaction with each other. But they missed something, and I felt really sorry for them that for a very long time of more than 2 months they couldn't meet their friends. And I think for those who were not that well connected, this digital gap in society was as visible as never before.
Yeah. Or for smaller children who could not use it and such, yes.
I think what we have to look for is for good judgment, to train people for good judgment, how to meet in a safe environment. And the other one is safe, and I'm safe. So be it the family, be in a cultural context, be it in a conference, and to get to a personal good judgment, which is more and more collective. Yeah? Now we know how to wear a mask. 6 months ago,
and when.
And when, and where, so that becomes a sort of common knowledge, how I can behave, that it's safe for everyone. That would be a good learning.
So I was very sorry when we started, I was head jumping into our discussion, but I think you all prepared also some statements. And if you would like, we could do some final statements instead of the entry statement, which I skipped in my hurry and nervousness. Do you want to do that? Yeah?
I included most of my statements in the different parts of the discussion, but if I may sum up, and I like that term of the event, the collective event, which we now have to collectively reflect in order to turn it into a collective experience. What I'm wondering is, are we able to continue with this process in the different settings we all are engaged in? We are currently preparing a risk management project for the winter tourism and engage all the responsible people in the communities, in the hotels, in the cable car companies, in order to build trust, to make sure that the health authorities in the neighbor countries, in the markets of our tourists, will finally trust us. And everybody understands that there is no competition at the moment. Yeah? It's not a neighbor village, it's not a neighbor destination, it's not a neighbor country. The only enemy at the moment, so to say, the only competitor at the moment is the virus, and the challenge to organize winter in a different way. And I hope that we can maintain this habit of developing a joint goal, ignoring the competition between the medical association and the social security funds when it comes to the reforms and the reorganization of healthcare. That's what I'm desiring or wishing and aiming for. And therefore I hope that the impact that the crisis had on our habits and attitude and reactions now will last for a while in the most positive sense.
Thank you. Please.
I was thinking what I missed to say. I think what I would wish for is that we also engage not only as private persons but also institutional, as like in educational institutions, like on really strengthening the thought of that we are all global citizens and that all the problems we are having and going to have are playing on a global level and can be solved only internationally and not nationally. So how to really get this into a normal curriculum, I really do not know at this moment, but I think to really be prepared better for the next pandemic, for the climate crisis, this actually is there already. But still, I think it's very important to strengthen that thought on all levels, from small institutions like NGOs and street workers to high up institutions like universities and so on. So I really think there must be also this political will to strengthen this and not make some populistic propaganda out of we can solve it just in our national way. So I think this would be my wish, that we really strengthen that.
I would say we are now very much in a mode of action. So we have our action model, and we need that to survive and to look after our institutions. But what I would like to see is that at the same time we have a close look at our perception models. How do we perceive reality? And maybe that this crisis somehow gets us, our frame, a little bit wider in terms of more international, not just national, not too narrow. To have a close look on our perception models. Robert Musil, der Mann ohne Eigenschaften, the man without qualities, he has this distinction between sense of reality, and we all have that sense of reality now, and the sense of potentiality, Wirklichkeitssinn und Möglichkeitssinn. And I think we should get a little bit bigger sense of potentiality to see, to have a frame which is bigger, not just national, but international, which is inclusive, not just the rich and the most important and the intellectuals, but average people, disadvantaged. I think if we could go down that road, that would be helpful for all.
Thank you very much. Sense of potentiality, that's really a great vision, and looking forward also to the potential that we have at the European Forum Alpbach 2021, where I hope I'm going to meet, and we hope we gave you some thoughts to think about the next year's fundamental topics, and it's going to be great transformation. So thank you all for joining us and for having this lively discussion. Thank you for Alpbach, for the great weather, the great air, the landscape, and the horizon that widens our spirits and thought. Thank you very much.